This is a Film Dimension interview. Today I'm speaking to Chris Watt. Chris is a screenwriter in the UK. Hello, Chris.
Hello there, how are you?
Very, very good. Very, very good. Good to speak to you. Um, as I've just said, you are a freelance writer. Um, you also have written or currently do write for several film magazines as well. So we're going to sort of talk about both the aspects of that. But first of all, what would you say is your background and how did you get involved in one being interested in films, but writing about films and also making films?
Well, I mean, I'd always written, even as a kid, but the notion of writing as some sort of means to a career didn't really begin until I was about 15 years old, I guess.
Sure.
Film had always been a very large part of my life. I'm from the VHS generation, so we grew up with a lot of videotapes. That kind of wonderful ritual of going to the video shop and getting the title that you wanted, and a lot of many of the people listening to this now won't believe the fact that there was a time when sometimes you would go to the video shop and that film you wanted would not be there. It would be out. There was only a limited number.
Yeah.
But I mean, film became a larger part of my life at the point of being 15 or so, because I think that was probably more to do with a curiosity about how you make something. I think when you're a kid, you don't really know or acknowledge that a film is directed or written or edited. Really, it's about the story and the actors. And then as you get older, you start to become more curious about how things work. I liken it to when you get to a certain age, you start like maybe taking a radio apart to see how it works. And to look at all the parts. And really, it was like that for me. I wanted to know everything about how you get to those iconic cinema images. I mean, E.T. flying across the moon is an image that is so evocative, but it isn't emotionally effective without everything we've seen before it, the story. So I kind of started buying screenplays, really. Faber and Faber, a great publishing house, were the ones that published most of the screenplays that you could buy back in the 90s, and I still have so many of them. And I would just go through all those books and would break it down. You see how you put a screenplay together, where the dialogue's supposed to fit in, all that sort of stuff. And I became utterly hooked and fascinated by the way screenplays are put together. The fact that this is where it all comes from. This is the treasure map that takes you all the way to X marks the spot, which is the release of a picture. And all the processes in between that can change the story so drastically. I mean, the screenplay is only the first step. After that, you've got the shooting of it. Things can change in the shoot. Things don't work. Things go in a different direction. Then you get to the editing of the film, and that can give you a different story altogether. So every part of that I found interesting. And so around the age of 15, I just started writing screenplays on my own. And generally they were terrible, and they were all clones of other films that you've seen. You're right, inspired by the stuff that you're watching at the time.
Yeah.
And it all escalated from there. And from there, I knew from an early age that I wanted to get into film. So from the age of 15, I decided I would work my way towards getting the qualifications to go to a film school. And by the time I finished secondary school, I was off to film school in Newcastle, and that was it. I was off and away.
Well, so yeah, so you knew from an early age that film is definitely something you wanted to be involved in and work out, get involved.
Yes.
I mean, that's the clarity of thought for that at say 15, 16 years old is very, very I'll say rare for a lot of teenagers, but you do find that, don't you, in filmmakers, that they know early on that it's something they really want to do, and that's what they're gonna focus on.
Yes, I think so. I think another thing that was quite important was, and you hear this from a few filmmakers, certainly Spielberg was one that talked about this a lot, the effect of a divorce on you can often have a ripple effect as well. My parents divorced when I was about 5 years old, and my way of coping with that was I escaped into videotapes, and I just watched films constantly, because it was a good way to get out of the house, essentially, even though you were still in the house. The sort of, there was almost a religious aspect to going to the pictures back in those days. I must sound like an old fuddy-duddy talking like this, but there was a time there weren't multiplexes. I grew up when you had to queue round the block to get into the theatre. There was one screen, and you had no guarantee you were getting in to see it that day. If the screen filled up, you were done. So it's always had a very, very special place in my heart, and escapism was what it was all about.
Yeah. No, I get that, and I do remember being a young child queuing up round the corner.
It
To
was
get
so exciting.
Yeah, it was. It was. I remember queuing up to see the animation, the Transformers, the movie, the animated version
Oh, sure, yeah.
of that in the early mid '80s. I
Yeah.
was a young child, but I remember that certainly. So I've got fond memories of that.
And do you remember as well that the films often there were like Disney didn't release films on videotape, so you had to wait every couple of years, and they'd bring Snow White back or they'd bring Bambi back into the theater. They would just sort of circulate through theaters over the course of the years, so you'd end up seeing them maybe only one or two times. And now I know that's hard for people to believe because everything is accessible now.
A different model, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you're right. There's something to be said for scarcity, perhaps, and more of an event built around it. So you went to film school. Essentially, you studied film, and again, writing was an important part of what you want to do, rather than right. I know I want to produce, I want to direct, I want to be a sort of crew member. It's the writing part of it is the one that you was that because you wanted to tell your own story, or just you felt an affinity with, or
That's a good question. I mean, I always think of myself as a storyteller first, and everything else kind of comes secondary. Directing, I directed a couple of things in film school. The process doesn't agree with me or doesn't inspire me as much as the writing process. They're very, very different ways of working.
yeah,
I mean, you're responsible for everything that's going on the set as a director, and there are so many other elements that you have to know. You have to have a good knowledge of lighting, of what every department is up to. You have to have the answer when someone comes up and say, do you want it green or do you want it red? That sort of stuff. I enjoyed the films that I worked on as director, and I've enjoyed crewing on things before. That's one of the things that you learned in film school. You would do work experience. I did work experience on little things here and there and other people's films, and
sure,
you'd work as a grip, you'd be lugging equipment up a hill, that sort of stuff. And that's very exciting because you're a part of it. And you get, I think, a respect for every single level on a film set, on a film crew, even down to the people that serve you your coffee. Even the caterers are a part of it.
absolutely,
Every single one of them. And I think that respect is fundamental. And that's one of the things that film school is really good at grounding in you, is that every part matters. But for me, the process of being able to sit at my typewriter and to sort of get yourself to a level where you can get the things that are inside your head onto a page in a way that makes sense to everybody else that will have to read it. There's no feeling like that. The feeling of getting that first draft out in particular, and I know a lot of writers say this, when you know you're a couple of pages away from finishing that first draft, there is no natural high greater. And I'm always chasing after that, really. Then it's the rewriting process, which is horrible. That's the bit I don't like. But it's all a necessary evil to get you to that place. So the screenwriting was always the thing that I was leaning towards. And it's only very recently that I've started to possibly dip my toe back into the waters of maybe shooting something myself. But it'll always be writing will come first.
sure. And do you think the fact that certainly if you're starting from an early point of view in terms of you've not made anything before, and maybe you're looking to make your first short or your second short, that it's you have to almost you have to write it yourself, as in, because yes, you could make a short if someone else has written it, of course, but it's never going off the ground unless it's your own thing, because that's the most important for you. And would that be a good advice for anyone who wants to start creating content? Is that just write it yourself, even if perhaps it's not the most amazing work you're ever going to see, but it's
Yeah.
something that gets you acting.
I think so. I think so, and I think that perhaps it's more easy than it ever was now because you can shoot a film on your iPhone now. So people have got little mini studios in their bedrooms now. It's wonderful. And back when I was starting out, we were still shooting on film. You'd have to get hold of an 8mm camera or a 16mm camera or a big clunky VHS video camera. But I think you're absolutely right. I think if you want to make films, the best thing to do is to try and tell stories. Don't try and tell stories that are strange or weird or out there just to try and get noticed, or you're always going to veer towards style over content if you do something like that. Tell a story that you want to tell. And I think if you want to be a director, I think often those short films you should write yourself, because you're going after a singular vision, and trying to adapt to somebody else's material can often shoot you in the foot. I mean, it works with some people. There are some filmmakers that are directors for hire. But I think if you're starting out, write your own stuff, know how to structure your story, and then see if you can shoot it. And obviously, with the technology we have now, you can shoot your film.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, you're right. It's easier than ever before, but also with that, it also is more complicated than ever before, because of options. Yeah, almost too many options, and then the whole model is slightly different. From your own experience in writing for film magazines, and you've written for several different magazines, freelance. Does that process of it's almost like one foot in the film world and one foot out, has that given you any particular insights into the film establishment, the film mechanics?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I feel very, very fortunate about is that once I graduated film school, I was sort of in and out of the industry. I'd do little bits and bobs here and there. I did apprentice as a video editor for the BBC very briefly, but it was just an apprenticeship, so it was only a certain number of months, and then you were done. And then I was working on little things here and there, music videos I would shoot for some local bands, and it wasn't until I published my first novel that I started to get interest from other people, and it was really writing the novel that got me into writing film criticism, because obviously the online world started to open up. It became a blog culture, and it became a freelancing culture to a certain extent. And I was very fortunate to get connected with a few people that had read my book that said, "Oh, you're interested in film, so would you like to write a couple of film reviews of these short films?" And that got me into the indie world more than anything. And I was able to cultivate an awful lot of relationships with some just wonderful filmmakers who are now working on bigger projects, and who are still producing content, and I'm very friendly with all of them, and we bounce ideas back and forth. The networking aspect has been wonderful, but I also was very fortunate to, through my film journalism, start doing interview sessions with a lot of people, and I would interview everyone in every element of crew. It would be an editor or a director of photography, a director, a producer, a writer. Just getting to hear about their processes and how they work is always going to be hugely beneficial to the way you work. You'll see things in a different light. You'll consider things that maybe you hadn't considered, and you become very acutely aware that every single person has a very singular way of doing things, and that there is no real set way of doing anything, particularly if you're trying to be creative. Because I think the more creative you are, the braver you are, the bolder you are. So I think and also being a film critic, I generally worked on film reviews. You tend to have, with the independent films, more of an interest in researching how the film was made before you review that film.
Yes.
I always find that quite important, because often you'll watch a little indie film or a little indie short, and it didn't work, and it's not a very good film. But you don't want to just sit there and say, this is trash and this is garbage and the filmmaker should never make another film. If you go into researching the film and realize they only had £12,000 to work with, or they had to do 3 or 4 jobs at once on that thing, you really have to factor that in and realize that these people are not making these films to make a lot of money. They're making these films to give themselves a platform to tell stories and to be creative.
Yeah.
And in that respect, yes, you can give them a negative review on their film, but you don't have to be mean-spirited about it. You can say, yeah, this didn't work, but I can see that this filmmaker is passionate about what they're doing, and that they, given the means and given the necessary ways of working, they could do something really special.
Yeah,
it's very rarely I've had to be really brutal or mean about a film. And usually I'm more brutal with the ones that have clearly had a studio backing them or should know better, because you see the bigger studio fare coming out. And a lot of those films are garbage, and the screenplays in particular are absolutely dreadful. It's concept driven rather than story driven. I always liken it to, you see a film like Transformers, the first Transformers movie, and I enjoyed parts of Transformers, but that movie's like 2 hours long. And the fact that I can't remember what the story of Transformers the movie is, whereas I can remember the story of Raiders of the Lost Ark and what Raiders of the Lost Ark is about. That is a very distinct difference between how screenplays are being written for big budget fare now and blockbusters now. Raiders of the Lost Ark has an airtight story to it, whereas Transformers is a concept. And you can do whatever you want within that concept, but it's not going to make for a movie that's going to last.
Why, in your opinion, why has that happened so much? Is it the evolution of effects-driven films? Is it the speed that these films are possibly churned out, that they're given a release date in a year's time in the future, and it's like, right, make it, and it's got to open this weekend? Why is it that more and more big budget studio films, again from people, as you said, that kind of should know better, have no substance?
I think the studios have a very large part to play in this, and this might sound like me just being highfalutin. I'm sitting here, I'm a little indie screenwriter who's made 2 or 3 tiny little things, so why should my opinion matter? But I think all artists should have a voice on something like this. Studios need to be aware that I think they're making just too many movies. There used to be a time when it would be like 5 or 6 movies got released a week. Now you're looking at like 20, 25 movies get released every week. And generally the studio is churning out product as fast as they can, based on the fact that special effects have become so refined and so easy to produce now. Expensive, but easy to produce. They can whip out a special effects driven movie in a year. And I think probably the last great effects driven movie that actually really cared about some sort of screenplay structure was possibly Jurassic Park. But also with that came the fact that they suddenly realized that effects had got to such a high level that they could start making anything they wanted, and anyone will go and see it. Who doesn't want to go and see Godzilla attacking a big monster? The problem is that's only 20 minutes of your screen time. You've got another 2 hours of screen time in which they just pack in any nonsense in order to get to that 20 minutes of CGI hitting CGI. And I think that studios are probably the largest criminals in this respect. They don't care about quality, they care more about quantity. The more product they can get out there, and you saw this with the little wave of 3D coming back a few years back, because technology got to such a good degree that they could do effective 3D. All of a sudden everything was coming out in 3D, and it was mostly garbage, and it was just them quickly capitalizing on the fact that technology got to this point. I mean, 3D had been tried about 3 or 4 times in the past, and obviously the technology was rubbish, so these films didn't last, and 3D didn't last. And weirdly enough, 3D hasn't lasted here either. It's gone away again, and it'll come back. But it's the fact that they think that the audience, they're treating the audience as lowest common denominator. They're saying, we will serve you up this junk and you'll eat it up and come back for more. And that's why the art of screenwriting has gone out the window, and it's a real shame.
Do you think it will come back, like all things kind of moving cyclically? That obviously, I mean, it does come back and still exists in terms of the indie world. But do you think there will be a time where suddenly someone makes a decision, it's like, we're not going to spend 200 million on a film to release it just because it's all just effects, and we're going to go back to actually filmmaking, that we could make a really, really engaging film for, say, 50 million instead of 200 million, and have more of a sort of resurgence in, again, we're talking about sort of big budget films here.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I think we might see it sooner than we think, and I think a lot of that might come down to the climate we're in at the moment, with the way coronavirus has completely halted production of any kind at the moment. And it's going to change the way people are able to make these movies, certainly with social distancing. So we're going to see smaller movies becoming more prevalent, movies that cost less, that are more based in one location, that have a minimal cast. That's where we're going to really start to see storytelling come back, I think. And I think that's a great thing. It's a shame that it's taken a pandemic to get us to this point, but I think we're going to see the movies coming out now in the next 10 years or so are certainly going to be more focused on story and character. We saw it a little bit in the early 90s. The American independent scene became huge for about 5 or 6 years.
Yes.
And that was able to coexist with films like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's because we were coming out of the 80s, which I think people had an awful lot of fatigue at effects-driven movies. And I think we'll get that fatigue again. I think it's already happened. I think a lot of people, you see it certainly if you're on film Twitter as much as I am, people are craving a good story, good characters, good plots. They're getting tired of the effects-driven stuff, and I can see it coming back. Having said that, when people use effects properly, and Spielberg's a master at this, Robert Zemeckis is a master at this sort of stuff, it can be very, very good. I think that the 3D technology used correctly, you get a film like Gravity, which I thought was extraordinary in 3D. And I think it's extraordinary in 2D, but it was able to utilize the technology and be properly immersive. It wasn't just, look, we can point something at you and we can throw something at you. It put you in a character's mindset in a way that I think elevated the story. And I think Scorsese did it quite well with Hugo as well, but that was more of a love letter to all facets of cinema. And 3D is a part of cinematic history, and I think that he was able to use that in a very creative way. But you notice that it's always the filmmakers who have got a track record with solid storytelling and with being ingenious within the cinematic art form that are usually the ones that use this stuff properly. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if 3D will ever have me completely sold.
Yeah, I didn't miss it when it suddenly disappeared.
Mm.
Again, you've made several short films yourself. Any advice for people perhaps wanting to make their first short film, or again, do you want to sort of go into a little bit detail about how you managed to make the films that you made? Lessons you learned along the way, tips, that sort of thing.
I mean, the lessons I've learned along the way in terms of the short films that I've worked on is surround yourself with as many passionate and creative, smart people as you can. I wrote a script for a short film called Manifest back in 2015. Now, the making of that film could be an interview in and of itself. It was kind of it's kind of my apocalypse now. It was very, very difficult to get that film made in the end, and there were a lot of problems behind the making of it. But that's telling tales out of school. But the process of making that film for me was almost a year of rewriting, and that was just on a short film that ended up being about 15 to 20 minutes long. And the finished product, sadly, wasn't a very good film. There's 2/3 of a good film there, I think. But the relationships I was able to cultivate off of that with some actors, with some crew members, they had a really good director of photography on that film, and I think the film looks beautiful. And I met some really inspiring people on that product, and that has kept me going. I've been interested in cultivating relationships with creative people, and I'm just hoping that continues into the future projects that I want to work on. I would say, if you can, get a partner, get somebody that you can work with and who is going to facilitate you as much as you can facilitate them. That's the way to get films made, because films are easier than ever to get made, but the flip side to that coin is that everybody's making films, and not everybody should make films. I think everybody can have a voice, but whether or not that translates to being able to tell stories through a visual medium is a very, very different ballgame. And that's a problem I've seen with a few short films that I've worked on. They'll look great. You can get great editing. You can do great sound design, stuff like that. Telling a story through pictures is very, very difficult, and that's where a screenwriter, I think, has to gel with the person that is directing the film. And if you can, get a partnership with somebody that you really trust and who you can bounce ideas off.
Would you say, because you've done both, you've written a novel and you're a screenwriter, how different are the skill sets for writing a novel and writing a screenplay?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm actually currently working in another medium as well. We're in the rehearsal process of a stage play that I've written, which is actually a musical. And I have really no interest in musicals, but a friend of mine came to me with a first draft and said, "Would you turn this into a stage play for me?" So I've done that, and we're now in the stages of rehearsing on that, which obviously is very difficult because we're in the middle of a pandemic now. So that it's been delayed, and we're doing Zoom calls to rehearse and read over scripts and things like that. But the process of writing a novel I found to be so freeing and so different to the sort of structure of a screenplay, because it's usually a stream of consciousness. You are inside the heads of the characters. You can illustrate anything in a novel. In a screenplay, you can only illustrate what that character is seeing, what the audience is going to see. You have to cater a little bit more for the audience because it is going to be something that is eventually going to be on a big screen.
Yeah.
So I always like to look at the way some screenwriters have adapted novels. One of the most clever adaptations of a novel that you'll ever see will probably be John Hodge's adaptation of Trainspotting. Because if you read that novel is so internal and is so much within the heads of those characters. How he managed to then illustrate all of those ideas, but make it visceral and make it real and make it cinematic it's a masterpiece of how you can adapt material like that. So I'd say the difference is mainly in point of view. The point of view you have when you're writing a novel is the point of view of your characters. Now you can do it in different points of view. You can be the voice of God, describing everything that's happened to these characters, but you can also do that in a screenplay, but you can't then go inside the characters' heads unless you're very clever. So there are so many different little trips that can knock you over in any of these processes, but I found it fascinating to be able to jump from one to the other.
Sure. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Um, yeah, I think maybe lots of people try to do that in film, but it gets lost.
Mm.
Um, I suppose. Lastly, again, we've covered lots of great things here. Actually, I mean, I think anyone listening to this, certainly if there's something they're looking to get into, can gain a lot from this.
Well, I hope so.
No,
That's really good.
definitely will. I mean, I'm just hearing what you're saying. I'm finding it massively helpful. Um, where is film going in the next sort of 10 years in terms of both how we consume film, but what film would possibly be like? Because obviously you can go back 10 years ago. What do films look like just 10 years ago, which is
Yeah.
quite quite similar but different. But 20 years back is more 30 years back. Films are looking very very different.
Yes.
What's film, the whole medium of making a film, watching a film, producing a film that gets seen the next, say, 5 to 10 years, in your opinion?
That's a big question. I mean, technology, I think, is going to change the way films are made. I think technology could have the potential to change the language of how cinema is consumed. And also the way you tell stories within the cinematic art form, I think, could change. VR technology, I think, is very interesting. They are already experimenting with making you immersive and making you a character within a story that you're telling. I mean, computer games have been doing this for years. You are the character that is seeing everything. You are corresponding with characters within the story. You are affecting what happens within the story, and they are trying to do that with cinema. So I think we'll see people experimenting with that. I don't think it'll be too popular to begin with. We're probably going to need the old masters to embrace this technology and show you how to incorporate it into the language of cinema.
Yeah.
I think the way cinema is consumed, we've already seen that change happen. Streaming services are, I'm sad to say, I think streaming services may end up being the way forward. Screens that people have in their homes are bigger now, sound systems they have in their homes are bigger now. The pandemic, I think, has shown that there is an appetite for people to want to see films, things like The Invisible Man and all these big movies that obviously were going to be cinema releases in the last couple of months and have had to find their home in a home. I think we're going to see that happening a lot more. Steven Soderbergh talked about this quite a lot in the late 90s, the incorporation of streaming services being a choice. And I think I like the idea of it being a choice, of you being able to look. You can either go out to the cinema right now and see this movie, or you can stay at home. And I think that's where you're going to see the balance shift. I think more people are going to want to stay at home. And it's a shame, really, because I think there's nothing matches the experience of seeing a film with an audience.
Yeah,
There's nothing quite like going to the cinema and sitting down and those lights dim. Somewhere between the lights dimming and that projector lighting up is magic. And I say that as somebody who was actually an ex-projectionist. When I was 18 years old, I was a projectionist in my local cinema. So I know exactly where the magic is taking place in lighting up that xenon bulb and seeing the dust playing in the projector beam. There is something incredibly powerful about going and experiencing a story with a large group of people and laughing together and crying together. Uh, that I think is going to be lost. But having said that, I think that we will get fatigue for the sort of less large experience. I think people are going to be sitting in their homes for 10 years and they're going to miss seeing a cinema experience, and they're going to miss seeing it with a large group of people. So I think it's kind of, they kind of are ebbing and flowing of a tide. I think you'll see the tide's going to come in. We're going to have streaming services become more popular than ever, more choice than ever. What I like about streaming services is that we are able to access films that you can't see in your multiplex, the art house, the independent work. It's a shame they're not being seen in the audience context, but it is also important that they do get seen because there are little gems and little works of art that are coming out of there. But we will see that tide come out and people return to the cinema. I think that the pandemic is going to have a lot to do with that as well, because I see people have got a real thirst and are really missing the communal experience of going to the movies, and I just hope that it continues.
sure. No, I think, well, I mean, everything you just said is absolutely correct and right. And I think you will see an increase in streaming services. We're trying to launch the film dimension on that basis. But
Mm.
the ability to watch a Broadway show or any sort of play or musical on TV or online doesn't stop people going to see it in person. So I think you're right that people still like the live aspect of it, of going to the theatre, and I think
Yes.
the cinema will evolve. So maybe you don't go to cinema every single week, but you go a couple of times a year. But it's more of an event when you go there, and
Yes.
you sort of almost dress up for it and make an evening of it, and you eat before you go and all that sort of thing, and you watch a film that is benefited from a huge screen.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't watch Lawrence of Arabia on a phone screen. You just can't.
It,
Those
that's
are films that are designed to be seen on the largest screen possible.
isn't it crazy? I always think that with the increased choice, increased ability with technology, and people have got bigger TVs now, but
Mm.
so many people consume media, consume films on their phone, which is, I
Yeah.
think, going backwards. It's going back 40 years ago when TVs were, only sort of 30 inches or something. Now you get like a 72-inch whatever screen, but so much content is produced or consumed rather via their handheld device, which again
Yeah.
going backwards, not forward, which is a bit crazy.
There's a weird laziness to it as well, because often you'll watch a film like Dunkirk on a mobile phone, and you might, you can just turn on your television and put the DVD in if you want, or you can just stream it from your television and get a big screen experience.
Yeah,
People are even just, they'll be lying on their bed with their phone saying, I could go downstairs to my living room and watch it, or I could just watch it here because I can't be bothered getting up.
you're right.
So, it's very strange. I think having it being so accessible and having all this choice at literally the click of a button has made us a little bit complacent in the experience of it.
Sure, sure, and as you said, it will probably come back because people get bored of that, and it
Yeah.
only takes someone to nudge. Yeah, with the development of technology, be it projecting on your wall or something, or just Wi-Fi projecting from your phone to the nearest device or whatever. It it will evolve and change, but yeah, I often find that that's quite a strange phenomenon we
Mm.
have in the last few years. Um, Chris, we could speak for hours on different aspects of this, and hopefully we can speak in the future again on other subject. Or
Absolutely, yeah. No, this was great.
but I don't want to take up any more of your time. But this has been fantastic, and thank you very much for sharing your insights and experience. If people were interested in basically what you've got to say, your reviews, everything else, how can they kind of contact you, follow your work?
I mean, I'm most often on Twitter. I mean, I'm writing all the time, so I'm constantly online. But they could follow me on Twitter. I'm at the Chris Watt, which is all lowercase, TheChrisWatt. You'll find links to anything that I do from there. I do have a WordPress blog, but it hasn't been updated in a long time. Usually, the work moves too fast for me to actually get a chance to
Sure.
do that sort of stuff. And obviously, with me essentially being in lockdown at the moment, the screenwriting has kind of taken over. So I kind of work from 8 o'clock till 5 o'clock, just writing script work. So I'm always online. So if anybody wants to get in touch, my DMs are always open. I love speaking with anybody who's passionate about cinema or is a creative, or if there are any producers out there that would like to speak to me about projects, please do. I've got a couple of indies that I would like to talk to people about doing at some point. So Twitter is the best place to find me.
Sure, and I'll put the links up when this goes live. Yeah, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. It was a pleasure.